All right. So I am here with Cable Griffith, who is a painter up in Seattle, Washington. His work deals with landscape quite a bit, and he has a beautiful piece in this month's show, Organic, at Columbia Center for the Arts. And Cable, I just wanted to start by kind of having you introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, how you got into painting, and what you're interested in your work.
Sure. Well, I've been in Seattle. Actually, I live in Burien now, a suburb of Seattle. But I've been around here for about 20 years. And before that, I grew up in the Northeast in a suburb of New York City. And I mean, I've been painting and kind of imagining and making things my whole life. And a lot of that has kind of carried through. I mean, I studied painting in school, but it kind of took a while for all of these kind of things to kind of settle together with my understanding of art history, but mixed in with like all of the things that I grew up with. And I think it kind of took a while for a lot of that stuff that really informed me to surface again. Art school has a way of kind of like, replacing, suppressing certain things. At least it had that effect on me. And it took me a while before I kind of let the things that really influenced me come back up and take them seriously. And not be kind of, and not feel funny about just these real things about my upbringing. And, I think I've mentioned like how, in terms of landscape, like I played a lot of video games and I, read a lot of storybooks and, you see the landscape depicted in all of these ways, and it has an impact one way or another. It has a total impact on how it's represented. So it means to me, like in terms of systems of the drawing, even symbols, and things like that. And then there was this kind of like always this desire and interest in exploration, improvisation into some kind of unknown. And I think that to me, that's art in a nutshell, but that's also I've something that still is part of my life in terms of hiking and camping and backpacking and those kinds of things as well. And so I guess I sort of have come around to where painting has become kind of that exploration into some kind of unknown, finding a place where, a lot of my interests have kind of come together in that way.
Cool, yeah. Because I've followed your practice for probably almost a decade now, I've seen you kind of go through some different iterations of your painting, and you're someone who isn't afraid to cross mediums. I've seen you design interactive pieces that involve video game components where the viewer can interact with the work. And I've also seen you kind of teach yourself shibori dyeing processes to make grids and different patterns, which you then come back in to the canvas and paint on. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about how those things come into your studio practice and how much of your practice is kind of about playfulness or trying out new things versus, just having this very specific type of painting practice.
Yeah. I like that question. I mean, I guess generally I'm a pretty curious person, and I don't like to feel like I'm repeating myself also. I'm always interested in learning new things. There is a kind of like foundation or core of interest, like I've said, that deals with landscape, but I think how that manifests is totally different depending on kind of the project or depending on the format of a collaboration, let's say. So like you were talking about the playable video game thing, which I did with my friend Brent Watanabe, and we admire each other's work and found an opportunity, actually several opportunities over the years, to kind of team up with me as the painter and providing a lot of the kind of like physical visuals in the gallery space, and then he would program this interactive playable game kind of over that, like projecting over it. So like that becomes this fun game between the two of us of like, what can we do with this? And we don't know what we're doing. We just kind of create it as we go, but there are set parameters for that. And I mean, I think with everything, I love like limitations, because it allows me to kind of dig into that. Like, let's see what we can do with just this, and this. And to me, painting is my favorite limitation. I mean, it can only do so many things. It's a flat thing on a wall. But within that, then you realize, wow, it's so expansive. So there's like the framed or stretched canvas limitation, of course. But then talking about some of the shibori stuff or the dye stuff, I mean, all of these become, or many of them become bodies of work. And I tend to work in kind of series or bodies of work because I guess it's a nice way of focusing on a specific idea, or it's like it becomes a parameter of time in itself to focus on an approach. So the shibori thing, I was just really, so I've always been interested in improvisation. Almost everything is, comes out of my imagination. I like being faced with that sort of void of like, what goes here? Like, what do I do with this blank canvas or this blank surface? And I mean, I don't really have to think about whether, it's going to be a landscape or not. It's almost always space. It's always been a window for me. But knowing that the history of abstract painting and abstract expressionism and automatic drawing and this kind of like letting your subconscious kind of flow, that was something that has always been an interest of mine. That's where a lot of my kind of ideas come from, which is like you kind of give yourself over to the page, you give yourself over to the to your parameters and see what kind of develops, and it creates this kind of call and response, which I find really meaningful. And I was kind of taking a step back from just assuming the beginning of a painting is always this kind of generic blank, white, usually gessoed surface, and was starting to think about it more in terms of the real materiality of the thing, right? So this canvas it's a material, it's an object, it has texture, it has character. And I started thinking about, well, what if this call and response started then, like started the moment you kind of unroll the canvas and I learned that you could make a grid using a shibori technique or a grid full die kind of idea. So I started playing around with kind of trying to bring a grid, which is, a geometric kind of an idea of an ideal, right? Like some sort of perfect geometry within a rectangle, and see if I could make a grid using a very, very ancient dyeing technique and sort of, have this idea about it being perfect. And of course, that's destined to fail, right? There's no way I could make it perfect. But that was part of the point, was to see what kind of grid could we make together. Me and the fabric and time and space and chance. So eventually got these grids out of it, and there was then the painting started at that point, and using the dyes as irregular colors, and then I would seal up the canvas with really clear priming material so that I could see the color, and then I would improvise oil paint on top of that, and that was a really I really liked that project because it seemed to kind of just take a different viewpoint on the relationship between myself and the painting, and I felt like I was more a participant in a way, and that resulted in a body of work. And I kind of returned to these ideas that I still have ideas I want to pursue with that method, and I feel like I always have like 2, 3, or 4 bodies of work in my head at any given time. So sometimes it's difficult to know, like, what am I going to do now? And if there's a show or something like that, that becomes also a useful set of parameters for, okay, I could, I guess, have a show where I just do a little bit of everything, and maybe that'll happen someday. But I think what I like about focusing is that I get to know the possibilities within that given parameter really well, or more than I would if I did a one-off. So if I do 8 to 12 of them, I really get to explore that idea. So I probably will come back around to it, but lately I've come back to, I guess, just more kind of like straight, almost representational, strange landscapes, which is something I've done for a long time. Every time I come back around to an idea, it's like I'm sort of bringing all of the things that I've learned or thought about and perspectives from other projects with it. So I'm never in the same place again, even if I feel like there's sort of a return. So that's kind of where I'm at now, which is a little bit more literal, descriptive landscapes. I mean, they're strange. They're not like, I'm not plein-airing it, but I do take all of that information when I go camping. I do sketches, I take photographs. That all comes into it. And there was this body of work that I'm doing now, just seemed like this was the time for this body of work. And I'm not always like directly responding to like events in the world, but there's like a time where that feels like this resonates for this. So there's definitely connections there of why this body of work feels like it needs to be now. Hopefully that answered your question
absolutely.
in a roundabout way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're another person that's really, I was talking to Cynthia Camlin yesterday, who and Susan Murrell both have a very strong interest in the landscape and landscape painting and the history of landscape painting. And I think those two artists in particular have a very strong interest in climate change and looking at how we are impacting the landscape around us, and especially when you look at the Western landscape. And I think for me, when I look at your paintings, there's often kind of art historical references, and there's a lot going on in terms of thinking about the history of the Western landscape in painting and what that's been used for and how we've looked at it and the meaning of that. And I'm wondering, I know there are some moments in your work that are, a little bit more in response to that. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about where you position yourself within that and, how you think about landscape in 2020 in terms of where we are.
I mean, yeah, the ecological state of our planet is pretty terrifying. And of course that is on my mind. I feel like my paintings though aren't necessarily a direct commentary on it. Although I can see how connections could be drawn to that. I mean, I think, landscape painting used to be kind of seen as this, like not very contemporary, not very relevant. At least when I was in art school, that was kind of one of those things that you kind of inherit, whether you understand why or not. And to me, painting and making in relationship to the landscape or the environment is critical. It's one of the most current things that we can do. So, I mean, my response, my relationship to the landscape, I think I'm just kind of depicting a contemporary problematic relationship to it, right? Like I'm kind of, I hope that in some ways the story that comes through the work is one that is relatable. But I'm not like talking about climate change necessarily, but I am talking, I think, about, this is where it gets hard for me. I don't always love assigning meaning to the work because I don't start there. But I find it later. And so I can only look back and kind of piece together some things and try to make sense of some of the work. But I mean, I think that there is a huge disconnect between people and the environment. And, I think that and I think there's some interesting things about how digital media popular culture, and other kind of things get in between us and nature, right? And I think I started to realize that I was suspicious of my ability to even truly connect with nature when on a hike, when when backpacking. And I have to say that's probably the closest I'll ever get, right? But all of our experience is completely already so heavily mediated. And I'm out there thinking about painting. I'm thinking about color. I'm thinking about all these things I want to bring back. But you're also conscious of when taking a picture of this phone that has maybe a text sneaks through if I forgot to turn airplane mode off, or we're always able to be reached and interrupted at any given moment. And even though I have this feeling of being lost and I seek it, I also know that I am like almost never lost with this thing in my pocket, right? And I think that's just kind of an example of this strange relationship to nature that truly I don't quite understand yet. And I don't know, when we'll really understand the effects of how mediated we are through digital technology. And I don't think I'm trying to necessarily create a critique of that relationship. I'm just kind of documenting it. Like, this is how it is in my life, right? And I think in terms of the topic, though, of climate change, there are things that sometimes other people have pointed out to me, and this has helped me inform my work, because I sometimes can't answer these things very well myself. But often the landscapes, especially when they're more pictorial, are, I'd say, kind of post-human. There's definitely an absence of presence there, of human presence. So sometimes there has been kind of like paranormal or extraterrestrial presences there. But there's also been this kind of I guess I'd call figurative landscape presence, where there's some kind of weird forms that take on some figuration, and there's groups, and there's sometimes battles or cuddles or different arrangements of these figures coming out of the landscape. Sometimes they look more human than others, but I think there's a gesture, at least in a lot of the work, where there's something alive there in a different way, in a more human way, I suppose. So that interests me a lot. And I guess there is a fun quality to the work. I recognize that. Sometimes they're very colorful. They look fun and almost kind of silly, some of these shapes and forms. But I find that there's something dark and menacing under that as well. There's something not right, or at least not like what we're used to. And so I don't know. I guess I sometimes go there in my head, imagining, well, what if Mother Nature takes care of us, heals herself, and rids herself of humans, which maybe sounds dark to me. It just seems inevitable. What else could emerge, right? What comes after us? So I suppose maybe there is some kind of ecological fable in that, but it's not something super conscious. It's just sort of evolved over time and becomes I guess a sort of a stage of storytelling in a way that I find really interesting. So I keep kind of returning to it. And it keeps on kind of changing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Obviously, you won't be at the opening or be down here for the exhibition, but if people are interested in seeing more of your work, can you kind of plug where they can find your stuff online?
Sure. Well, my website is cablegriffith.com. I've archived a number of years of work there. And then, so the body of work that I'm doing now will be at Linda Hodges Gallery in Seattle in October, or at least that's the plan. We're all adjusting to a new reality of visiting shows. Things have been bumped a bit, but yeah, that's the plan for October 2020. I just completed a large-scale installation at SeaTac Airport this year, and we haven't even really celebrated that yet because it sort of got finished right when the pandemic hit. So, but anyone who is traveling through the airport can go see that at Concourse C. And some other public pieces in the works that hopefully will be completed in the next couple of years or so. And I guess that's it for current projects.
And then which Instagram handle is best for folks to follow you?
Cable Griffith Studio.
Great. Thanks. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks, Carolyn.